Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Kristen Smith. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Christina Langell. We've been following closely this story out of Pennsylvania that kind of echoes what's been happening nationally with mass transit systems as they've struggled to recover after pandemic losses when everyone worked from home. And in Pennsylvania, we have the Southeastern Regional Transportation Authority, and we call it SEPTA. And they are in dire straits as well, struggling to make up for that ridership as well as aging infrastructure and just basically support to help support the economic region in general. And so we're coming up on a big deadline, aren't we?
Yes. So there is a major budget shortfall for SEPTA. I think it's around 134 million currently that they're about to hit. If the state legislature doesn't do something to approve additional funding for mass transit by the 14th, which is a week from when we're speaking, next Thursday, if they don't do something to fund it by then, there will be major cuts to the system. So they're going to be just cutting routes out entirely. This includes a lot of routes that people take to work or school every day. They will be raising fares. They will be reducing the amount of offerings on the routes that they do keep. So, less likely to find times that run into when you need to be there. And also, you're going to have a lot more people on those things because the routes have been reduced. So it's a pretty big calamity approaching for Philadelphia. That's all expected to go into effect on August 24th. The school year for the Philadelphia school district begins August 25th, and a lot of those students use public transportation to get to school.
Yeah, it's much bigger. I think for those of us who live outside of the region that is served by SEPTA, we don't think of how important mass transit is when it comes to getting to school and to your doctor's appointments and to simply getting around. In a place like Philly, you're not as car reliant as you would be in the rest of the state. And so that factors into people's economic situations. And so they really rely on that mass transit. And we've been dealing with a bus shortage in Pennsylvania for several years. So mass transit's really filled a gap there as far as getting kids to school, which I think we all agree is vital for kids, for our economy, for every part of our lives, quite frankly. And speaking of the rest of the state, the big struggle here with this, which has been years ongoing, as we mentioned before, the big struggle has been that SEPTA has been saying, this is a problem, we need more help from the state. And the state, particularly in the Senate, has been really slow to react. They've been concerned that SEPTA hasn't taken enough accountability for its own management. They have, Senate Republicans who control that chamber have wanted to see more accountability from the system. They've wanted more, they were worried about rising crime, although that has been lowering in the last few years. They've just wanted to find a way to make sure that this money that they will be giving, because it's a significant amount, almost $300 million, that this will go to good use because there is good fiscal management already happening. So those those qualifications have been on any mass transit deal that could happen. And so the conversation's been really evolving over the last couple of years to get there. And yesterday, actually, we had a transportation bill that specifically in the House, one of the representatives who sponsored it, I think it was Representative Doherty, he went through point by point which elements from the Senate's own transportation bills were included. So can you talk a little bit more about what those are?
Yes. So he tied all of the funding in this bill to the sorts of performance measures that the Senate has proposed. So ideally, this fifth bill would include, if it moves forward from the House, it would include both the things that the Senate wants and the things that the House has been asking for. So specifically the way that the funding works that they're asking for is, it will be an increase of the sales tax that is already received by the state. So they're not going to increase sales tax for consumers. they're going to increase the percentage of the sales tax that goes towards mass transit. And the reason they say they can do this is because sales have gone up. So they've had more sales tax revenue, and they say, like, it's a bigger pot. We can give more to Philadelphia. We can give more to mass transit, not just Philadelphia. That's important. But because we have these concerns about SEPTA, we will require these reporting and measurements when it comes to things like crime, things like staying on budget. But it kind of comes down to this this funding measure proposed by Governor Shapiro in his budget, which would be, that sales tax measure. Republicans have said, well, where is new funding coming from? We could see the co-chair of the House Transportation Committee, Benninghoff, as you mentioned, he said, well, sure, we have extra money from sales tax right now, but that's not necessarily, going to continue into the future. We can't really predict how that's going to work out. So we need more stable funding. And that's when, you have Democrats come back and say, well, we tried to pass adult use marijuana and you all didn't want to. And that would have been additional revenue to the state. So there's sort of an impasse as to how it's funded, but it kind of comes to this more fundamental question of whether or not you believe that mass transit is a public service or something that should be run more like a business, because I think that's what Republicans are looking for. Well, you should be making enough from fares and tightening your budget and doing all this stuff so that it operates well. But it's not historically a business. Public transit used to be a business. It was privately owned and operated, and it did not work in that fashion. Private industry abandoned that, I believe, in the 60s, and it became part of the state. And we've seen in COVID, regardless of whether or not you have a lot of fares, when you have a fare-based system, it's does not stop the fact that those first responders, those critical people who needed to get to work, who needed to take care of people during COVID, who needed to work at the grocery stores and work at the hospitals and take care of everyone, they still needed SEPTA, even though there were very few people on the train. So you still need that transit system regardless of how much money it draws in. And that's I think the fundamental difference in how they're approaching it is, like, can we make this a business, or is this, something that the state is responsible for, like it's responsible for education, like it's responsible for maintaining roads, like it's responsible for these things that are beyond business.
We have that conversation a lot. In Pennsylvania is where is the line drawn. I think the most obvious parallel is the state-run liquor stores that Republicans have been arguing for a long time should be privatized, and that would generate more revenue than the money that we spend and get from it now. This is a much different situation. This is a much larger issue as far as the economic impact of everyday life. It's important to note, too, that state support of mass transit, it's not unique to Pennsylvania. A lot of states do it. I think perhaps all states, although don't quote me on that. Our neighbors do it. New York City, obviously, they have a very different economic structure as far as where their money is coming from. Their tourism industry is huge. So their fares and their local government can make up the bulk of the funding for their system. In Pennsylvania, we have a smaller tourism industry, although Philadelphia arguably gets the most in the region. And speaking of that, cutting services would really put a dent in Governor Shapiro's big plans to make us more of a tourism hub. We have the World Cup coming up. We have the America 250 celebration. There's other sports events. I mean, think about it. The Eagles games draw how many people every weekend. We've got,
I think the stadium holds 70,000. So
right.
Huge.
And mass transit is a very, very integral part of getting people to those things and providing economic resources that then funnel back into the rest of the state. So there is a lot of layers to this, and there will be a deal eventually. It's just a matter of how important is it to Senate Republicans who are really holding the keys here, because they have to agree with whatever it is. And as I've said before, Shapiro has been pretty good at negotiating his top priorities in the last couple of years, mostly because he's aligned with Democrats. but this seems to be the biggest one. And it appears that's why we don't have a budget deal and it's 2 months late at this point.
Yes. And I just want to add, since you talk about where the money is coming from, that one of the things that Democrats, at least the Philadelphia delegation, are saying is that we provide, almost half of the state's revenue from this economic area and get back about 19%. So Philadelphia is sharing its wealth with the rest of the state when it comes to how we spend our budget overall. And they view it as getting a disproportionate amount back. But that's something that Rep. Nielsen, the chair of the Transportation Committee, said. He said, we're happy to share the wealth. That's brotherly love. Like, we take care of the whole state. We don't just take care of Philadelphia. And to that end, I just want to point out that the Pittsburgh Regional Transit is also funded through this bill, as is the public transit across the state, which there is public transportation in all 67 counties, including rural areas. And especially in rural areas, it's disabled and elderly people who really rely on, everywhere. There are a lot of disabled and elderly people who rely on it.
Right. And to the point about Philadelphia's contribution to the rest of the state, I think there is some internal struggle because there's always, people, when they think of Pennsylvania, it's Philadelphia first, Pittsburgh, and then the rest of us. And I think that that's an internal struggle for a lot of people who don't live in those cities. But the truth of the matter is that those cities help keep the rest of us going. And from time to time, that requires an economic investment on the taxpayer side. And to the Democrats' point, they have found a way to fund this. That's not going to require more taxpayer money. It just requires a shift in how we allocate it. So it's definitely, I don't want to say more thoughtful, but it's certainly more technical than prior proposals have been. And perhaps that's what's getting us closer to a deal. The House is coming back over the weekend. Perhaps it is because there is some agreement in the Senate. That's the optimistic look. It could not be that either. They might just be up against the deadline, but there will be a lot of developments on this front in the next couple of days. And to keep up with those developments, follow us at thecentersquare.com/Pennsylvania.